This is Buster, and he has a bone to pick with you. Welcome to Up All Night DIY. I'm Monica. Thanks for joining me. It's time for the Can't Sleep Creations Rustoween Collab, hosted by my buddies Dawn of Shabby Meets Bling, Shelly of Repurposed My Way, and me. Hi. And we're being joined by lots of our favorite creators for some rusty, rustic, and primitive Halloween goodies. I'm making this sweet toughie, Buster Bones. This is quick and easy. Let's get into it. I have here a block of wood. It's about 2 inches wide by 3.5 inches tall. I'll be using a 2.8 inch foam ball and some Model Magic to get us started. I'm going to tap a flat spot on my ball to keep it from rolling around. Then I'm going to condition a handful of clay by kneading it. This, I feel, makes it easier to manipulate, and I also think it helps it to keep from cracking. And I'm going to roll it flat with my brayer. I'll cover the ball with the clay, pressing it firmly to ensure that it's well stuck on that foam. And I'm just going to manipulate it. I'll cut some of this off, but anything that I cut off I'm going to keep handy because I'll use that to fill in any gaps. See, there's a wee gap there, so I'm just going to add a little clay. And I'll do that until the ball's completely covered. Once it's completely covered, I roll it around on the table to smooth it out. I do this through the process of covering it so, it's quicker to do it this way to make it smooth. I'll use my bowl tool to create his eye sockets. I'm just lightly pressing to make little divots. I'm taking a wee bit of clay and rolling a small thin log. I'm going to roll it into a cone shape, flattening the bottom. This is going to be his nose. Right, so let's push that right in between his eyes. I'm going to incorporate the nose with the clay by using, believe it or not, this is like a nut picker or something. I found this in the kitchen drawer. So I have all these clay tools, but this is what I'm using. So see, you don't really need the tools. You can always use something else to manipulate the clay. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. I'm rolling over the seam of the nose to incorporate it with the clay on his face. Again, you can use a paintbrush handle for this if you don't have the clay tools. Let's give him some cheeks, some bony cheeks. So I'm just going to roll out a small ball of clay here. I'm going to cut it in half. And when I cut it in half with this tool, it kind of pushes it into a cheek shape. I really don't have to do too much to it. Just pop it on his face. So I'm going to push those right below his eye sockets, and we're going to incorporate them too. I'm just rolling over the seam where the cheek meets the clay on the face, and that'll help it to stay stuck. You feel me? I'm adding a drop of water here with my paintbrush because my clay's already starting to dry, so can't have that. And I'm going to roll over that area again where I added the water, just to make sure. I'll give him dimples by pushing my tool up and into the clay from underneath his cheeks. Cute wee dimples. Ah. I have another wee ball of clay here that I'm going to use as his chin. So I'm just going to push that right into place and incorporate it just like I did his cheeks. Now, I don't really mind if these are a little bumpy and whatnot because I think that adds to the handmade feel and to the folk art feel. You know what I'm saying? I think he looks pretty good, so I'm going to set him aside to dry. In the meantime, let's work on his hat. He's going to get a derby. I'm going to roll a small ball of clay, and I'm going to flatten the bottom just by pressing down lightly on the table. This will be the dome part of his hat. And when it comes to stuff like this, I just guesstimate the size. And sometimes I'm lucky, sometimes I have to start over. But this time, I was lucky. Right size. So now I'm going to flatten some more clay, and I'm going to use a circle cutter to make the brim. There's a wee bit of thickness to this. I want to say maybe about a 1/4 inch, because this is going to be the brim of his hat. So I want it to have, a little substance. So now I'm going to place the bowl on top of the circle, pushing it together to form the hat. And this will stick well to itself. I don't need glue or anything like that. Just make sure it's well stuck just by pressing. Now this hat's going to need that little rim part that kind of flips up. So I'm going to roll a thin snake of clay, and I'm going to trim right around the circle with the clay, cutting away any excess and pushing the clay together in the back. There we go. That kind of looks like a derby, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I'm happy with that. What I am going to do is press the sides up a little bit, because when you watch the old cartoons with the bulldogs with the cigars and the derby hats, the sides are always kind of pushed up a wee bit. So we'll do that. And I'm going to set that aside to dry. Right, so I'm going to roll out 2 more logs of clay to create his arms and legs. What I wanted to do was use dowels, but I recently cleaned up my craft supplies, and now I have no idea where my dowels are. So, you know how that goes. Yeah, so we're going to roll these out, and I'm going to cut them in half so that they're equal lengths. But if I was going to do this again, I would definitely use dowels, only because it's quicker and way easier, I think. Not that this was hard, but you know what I'm saying. Anyhow, I rolled out the logs, I cut them in half, and we're going to set them aside to dry too. Let's work on his body, which is this block of wood. So I'm going to give that a very loose coat of Ceramcoat charcoal. Now normally I would do 2 coats, but since this is a rustic piece, I'm not going to worry about it because I'm going to distress it anyway. Save myself some paint. This is really such an easy way to create his body too, and it's cute and rustic. So, the block of wood, yeah, I'm digging that. Now I'm going to come in and add a burnt sienna stain to the wood. I'm just going to slap it on there and wipe it back with a paper towel until I get the look that I'm after. I created this stain myself using burnt sienna paint and Joe Sonia retarder medium. That really comes in handy to make a quick stain. You could, I guess, just do it with water as well, but I prefer using the medium. But, it's personal preference. I'm going to add a vintage ad to the front of the block. So to do that, first I'm going to add some white paint right here, just so that the print will be more visible. Okay, now let's sand the edges of the block to expose some of the wood to give it that aged look, make it look a little more worn. You feel me? I printed a vintage ad from Kresge's 5 and 10 for Halloween candy. I want to add it to the front of this block, so I'm just going to add a little Mod Podge. This is just on regular printer paper, that's why I wanted to paint that white stripe down the center. I'm going to add this on top here, and I actually think I'm going to need to add a little more Mod Podge to the paper too. So I'm going to lift that up and add Mod Podge directly to the back of the paper and then press it down. And I'll add a top coat of the Mod Podge as well. Make sure that that's on there and that the edges aren't going to lift. You know what I'm saying? I forgot to mention that I sprayed the ad with clear matte sealer. Otherwise the Mod Podge would smear the print. So make sure you do that. Right, now that it's on there and it's dry, I'm going to hit it with a little distressing ink. I'm using Rusty Hinge. This is a Tim Holtz distressing ink. And then we're going to follow that up with vintage photograph, which is one of my favorites, and a wee bit of black. I'm going to drill small holes on both sides of the block, one at the top and one at the bottom for his arms and legs. And then I'll do one on the top of the block for his head. The clay sat overnight and it's really well dry, so let's get it painted. His head and arms and legs are each going to get 2 coats of acrylic white paint. I'm using Ceramcoat, but any white paint will do. Even though the clay is white, I like to add that layer of paint because I think it's easier to distress it with other paints if there's already a coat of paint on there. And you could probably just add a coat of Mod Podge, that might work too. But for me, I just like to add the white paint. But you do you. I'm going to give his hat 2 coats of Ceramcoat charcoal paint. Now I always lean toward charcoal rather than black because it's softer, and then if I want to add shading, I can always do that with black. So I'm also going to use charcoal paint to paint the inside of his eyes. I'm using a detail brush for this. And I'm just going to go with the 1 coat here just because I think it gives him a more vintage look. His mouth is going to be a wee line with a few intersecting strokes, and I'm going to use Hippo Grey for this. See, just little stitchy lines kind of, and then I'm also going to give him wee eyebrows. We're going to give that a moment to dry while we paint his arms and legs with some charcoal, but I'm going to leave his hands and his feet white. Back to his face, I'm going to use Hippo Grey to add little raindrop shapes to his nose, to give him that skeleton nose. I dotted his eyes with white using a dale. Now he'll get hippo pupils. I also came back and gave him little white dot highlights too. I'm going to stripe his arms and legs with white. They'll get 4 vertical stripes around each piece. I feel like this kind of gives, the impression of bones, and it's just a fun embellishment, I think. What do you think? Time for details. I'll dry brush the clay pieces first with Drizzle Grey. I'm offloading most of the paint from my brush by scrubbing it on a paper towel, so that there's just a hint of paint that remains. You feel me? I'm really focusing on his features, getting into the grooves, and then I'll do around his head, and we'll do his hands and his feet too. And you know what? We're going to dust his hat with some of that Drizzle Grey too, just a wee bit. Now I'm going to come back in this time with Ring Grey, which is slightly darker than the Drizzle. I like to build my color up in layers. So I'm going to add some to his cheeks, and then again, focus on his features and all around his head. We'll do his arms and his feet too, just like we did with the Drizzle. I think he needs to be a little darker, so I'm going to come back in this time with Hippo Grey, and again hit all those same areas. I dry brush his hat with some black, add a little shading. And I'm going to use a little burnt sienna here as well to tie in to the distressing on the wood block. We'll add some to his face, again hitting those features. I want to pull in the colors that are going to be on his body too, and this makes him look a little rusty and beat up. His hat needs a wee touch too, don't you think? His cheeks will get white swirls, because that's how I roll. I'm using a really thin liner brush here. I think it's a 000. Just wee swirl. There we go. Now, I'm going to lightly dust him with some real cinnamon. So I'm just going to sprinkle it on, and I'm going to work it into the grooves on his face. I'll use my fingers and my brush to kind of push it in there. I think this adds some texture, and I just like the way it looks. I'm going to add some to his head too, just for kicks. Right, now all the clay pieces will get a top coat of Mod Podge. I'm just dabbing it on here with a cosmetic sponge. To embellish his body, I'm going to glue 4 rusty washers at the corners of the ad. I'm using Fabri-Fix to attach them. E6000 would work as well, but this should hold them fine for my purposes. They're just tiny little lightweight washers, so I think this is good enough. I made these little eye hooks out of rusty wire. I linked them together, and I'm going to glue them into the holes that I drilled on the sides of the block. A little hot glue will hold them in place, no problem. Now I'm just going to push those wires into the arms and legs. They'll slide right into the clay, no worries. You can add a wee drop of glue, but I don't really think it's necessary, not for my purposes, but you may want to do that. There we go. Yeah, he's coming together. I pushed a small piece of skewer into the bottom of his head, and I made him a collar from crepe paper. I'll link my embellishments videos that shows you how to make these. It's really easy. You just need needle and thread. So I'm going to fluff it out just a wee bit, and I'm going to slide it onto the skewer. I'll add a wee bit of hot glue into the hole at the top of the block, and we'll pop his head into place. I pushed a piece of toothpick into the bottom of his hat, and now I'm going to add some hot glue to the top of his head and then push the hat into place. And I'm going to put it at a jaunty angle because, you know, he's just that kind of guy. And with that, Buster Bones is done. Let's take a final look at this wee toughie. I did trim out his cuffs and the bottom of his pants with black pipe cleaner. I'm pretty happy with the way he turned out. This was a really quick and easy project, and I do hope that it encourages anyone who feels hesitant to create with clay. I say, jump in. It's such fun to work with clay, and Rustic Primitive Halloween is the perfect style for a newbie, whose bumps and any perceived flaws actually just add charm to the folk art piece. So, embrace them. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Please be sure to check out Dawn and Shelly's channels, and of course the playlist. We are accompanied by some seriously talented creators. You'll find links in the description box along with a list of my supplies. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. Stay creative, my friends. Thanks for hanging with me. See you next time. Up all night with Monica.